Hi everyone, Jai Hind. And you must have heard the news that Japanese Prime Minister, she is on the visit to India for the 16th annual summit that will be there between India and Japan. Now over here, this is very important because this is not just about the news that she is in India. This is also about the ties that were shaped over a period of time. And whenever we are going through such kind of news, we must, move back in the time and see how the ties, they were reshaped over a period of time. So this is very important, and that is what we'll be discussing in this session along with me. My name is Bhavar Singh Surohi. I'm ex-NDA 115th course and qualified civil services in 2012. And I welcome you all on the platform. Now, this is very important that it is the first time that Japanese Prime Minister Sanai Takeichi, she is on the visit to New Delhi. She arrived on 1st of July 2026 for the 3-day visit, and this is her first time to India after taking the office in October 2025. And also, she is the first female Prime Minister of Japan. Now, ultimately, she is co-chairing the 16th India and Japan Annual Summit along with Prime Minister Modi. They will be reviewing the full spectrum of the special, strategic and global partnership. Also, she was given the ceremonial reception at Rashtrapati Bhavan, and there will be delegation level talks. There would be exchange of MOUs, and even the India-Japan Business Forum mark the visit that is there. So in this complete, forum or the bilateral talks that will be there, of course, Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Sanai Takeichi will be there. She is also AB Protigi. All right. At the same time, there will be External Affairs Ministry, the MITI side ministers on the economic security and AI strategy, and also the apex industry bodies at the India-Japan Business Forum. And ultimately, these are the participants that will be there for the bilateral talks that is between India and Japan. And this is after Modi have visited Tokyo in August 2025 that there were the forum that was laid down. Now, this is a quick snapshot that what has happened and how the ties between India and Japan have shaped. So it was in 1952 that the diplomatic relations, they were established through the peace treaty. And this is the 16th annual India and Japan summit that we are talking about, which is being held in New Delhi in July 2026. And the bilateral trade that was there between India and Japan in the financial year of 2025-26 was to the tune of more than $27 billion. And Japan's 10-year private investment pledge is of yen 10 trillion, that amounts to $68 billion in India. And there are more than 1,500 of the Japanese companies which are right now operating in India. So this is of quite strategic importance because when it comes to the Japan, so Japan is basically the third largest economy and the key US treaty ally as well, which is pioneer of the free and open Indo-Pacific concept. Also, when it comes to India, so India is the largest Indo-Pacific democracy and the fifth largest economy, the principal continental balancer for the China in Asia as well. Now, together, when it comes to India and Japan, they anchor the Quad alongside with the US and Australia also. Now, the current status is about the ties which stands at the Special Strategic and Global Partnership, and that is since 2014. It is India's highest partnership that is there with any of the Asian countries. Now, over here, this is the 2027. It will mark the 75th anniversary of the diplomatic relations as well. And the relationship is increasingly organized around the economic security between India and Japan, where we are talking about semiconductors, we are talking about critical minerals, and even AI and supply chain resilience as well. So we'll be talking about the complete background as well, that how the India and Japanese, relationship, they have emerged over a period of time. But before moving ahead, let me tell you that on the platform of Study IQ, we have the GS Foundation courses, which are Resolution P2I batch for the English medium. Now, you can enroll into the batch, which is based on the SMART model, where you get the structured classes, mentorship, assessment, revision, and test as well. Now, over here on the platform of Study IQ, we are offering you with 50% off with double validity, which is a limited time period offer. And this is available only till 2nd of July. And you can use the code BRS Live for fetching this offer on our platform. Now, over here, it is very important when it comes to the international relations, we must go through the historical evolution of those relations as well. Like I said, now over here, when it comes to the earlier times, so there were the religious and the cultural roots that can be, traced to the India and Japan relationship. We have the Buddhism that have transmitted to Japan in the 6th century CE through Korea and China. And it carries the Indian philosophical and the artistic influence as well. Now, When it comes to Indian monk, we have Bodhisena, who had presided over the eye-opening consecration of the great Buddha of Todaiji and Nara in 752 CE as well. Also, when it comes to the Japan's Fukujin, that is the seven lucky gods, they trace their several deities to the Hindu origins or the Hindu deities. Like, for example, we have Banzaitin. She is from Saraswati deity that is there. Now, at the same time, there were the trade and exchanges as well between India and Japan. In the previous time, that was through the Silk Route and the maritime Southeast Asian networks for the centuries. Also, when it comes to the Sanskrit and the Buddhist text, they have shaped the script of Japanese, that is Kana, and even the art and the temple architecture. Also, the pre-modern contact remained cultural and the religious rather than the state-to-state diplomacy in the ancient time or in the previous era. Now, when it comes to the modern links, so the early modern links could be traced to Swami Vivekananda's late 19th century writings, which drew the Japanese admiration for the Asian spiritual resurgence. Even Rabindranath Tagore visited Japan multiple times, and he influenced the Pan-Asian intellectual exchange as well. And the Japan-India Association was established in 1903, and mark this, that this remains Japan's oldest international friendship body as well. Now, over the period of time, it was about the World War era and even the freedom movement. So what happened at that point of time? So it was Ras Bihari Bose who visited and settled in Japan after 1915, and he built a network that shaped the INA or the Indian National Army. Later on, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, he used Japanese-controlled Southeast Asia as the base for INA's operation between 1943 to 1945, which is a complex and contested legacy as well. Later on, Justice Radha Binod Pal, he has actually acquitted the 25 of the Japanese, and ultimately his dissenting judgment at the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal in 1946 to 48, it is deeply revered in Japan to this day as well. And there is a monument that is dedicated to justice also in the Japan that you will find. Also, when it comes to the post-war, so India had declined to attend the 1951 San Francisco Conference, and India had objected to harsh terms that were imposed upon defeated Japan. Also, Prime Minister Nehru, he has gifted in 1949 an elephant, Indira, to a war-battered Tokyo Zoo, which became a symbol of goodwill between India and Japan. And Japan was among the earlier states which have recognized Indian independence in 1947 as well. Now, 1952 was the birth of the diplomatic relationship between both the nations, where there was a peace treaty that was signed by or with Japan on 28th of April 1952, which actually established the formal diplomatic relationship between both the nations. Now, one of the Japan's first peace treaty was this after the World War II, which restored its sovereign standing as well. Now, also it is important that India's iron ore exports, all right now also we are exporting iron ore to Japan, but at that point of time, because Japan was rebuilding itself, so India's iron ore exports aided the post-war industrial recovery for Japan also. Now, there was the Cold War age or the phase that started just after the Second World War. Now, over here, there was quite partnership that was laid down between India and Japan. There were the economic foundations. In 1958, Japan extended its first ever yen loan, that is ODA, or the Official Development Assistance to India, and India remained the largest recipient of Japanese ODA for decades as well. There was Japanese Prime Minister Nobusuke Kishi. He visited India in 1957 and provided the early momentum for the ties between India and Japan. And the trade, it stayed modest at this point of time, and Japan focused its major issue or its major things over the post-war alliance architecture on the USA. Then comes the structural constraints as well, because ultimately India was non-aligned at that point of time. India had pioneered the non-aligned movement leadership, and that sat uneasily with the Japanese formal US alliance, and there was a treaty that was signed between Japan and US in 1951. There were Cold War bloc politics as well that limited the strategic convergence, despite that there were warm bilateral sentiments between India and Japan. There were high-level exchanges which actually continued modestly. There was Crown Prince Akihito in 1960. He visited, and there were the Japanese visit that were made by Nehru at this point of time. Now, the major, the change in the relationship between India and Japan that came after 1990s. All right, there was the phase of the liberalization, and we actually at India we had adopted the LPG reforms or the liberalization, privatization, and globalization. So after the reforms, it actually opened up the new commercial opportunities for the Japanese firm. Although when it comes to Maruti, so Suzuki was already aligned with, and this was already a flagship partnership since 1982. In 1998, then what happened was that there was the second Pokhran test that was conducted by India, which actually made India a nuclear weapon state. And here it triggered the Japanese sanctions. There was suspension of the political exchanges and aid, which was later on lifted only in 2001. Now, in 2000 to 2026, this was the institutionalization of the ties between India and Japan, where in 2000, Prime Minister Mori and Prime Minister Vajpayee, they launched Japan-India Global Partnership in 21st century. In 2005, there was annual summits that began under the Prime Minister Koizumi's visit, and there was strategic orientation of global partnership that was signed between both the nations. In 2006, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, he visited Tokyo, and that elevated the ties to strategic and global partnership. Now, the strategic deepening came after 2007. In 2007, Prime Minister Abe, he had given a speech in the Indian Parliament that is about confluence of the two seas, and this is a conceptual seed that laid down the Indo-Pacific idea. In 2008, there was the joint declaration on the security cooperation, which was the first of the Japanese pact with a non-US ally partnership as well, or the power as well. In 2011, Japan and India, CEPA was signed and entered into force, covering the goods, services, and even the investment as well. Now, later on from 2014, we see that we had the leadership of Prime Minister Modi. And during this period, what happened was that the ties, they actually moved to the advanced layer. In September 2014, Modi visited Tokyo, and the ties were upgraded to the Special Strategic and Global Partnership. In January 2014, Prime Minister Abe was the chief guest at the India's Republic Day parade as well. In 2015, India-Japan Vision 2025 was launched, and Abe visited India, and the MOU was signed on the bullet train, which are also called as the Shinkansen in Japan. Now, from 2016 to 2022, there was the institutional deepening of the ties between both the countries, where you see in 2016, there was the Civil Nuclear Cooperation Agreement that was signed. In 2018, there was 2+2 dialogue, where we have the foreign ministers and the defense ministers, they involve into the dialogue. So that architecture and acquisition and cross services agreement that was signed between, this was the discussion began. In 2020, there was reciprocal provision of supplies and services, the agreement that was signed, basically, which is the military logistics pact between India and Japan. Then in 2022, the Prime Minister Kishida, he had visited India, and clean energy partnership was laid down. And also there was a pledge of 5 trillion, that is nearly about 42 billion of the dollars investment that was made by the Japan, that this much will be invested in India. Now, between 2022 to 2026, this is the period of the Takaichi chapter, where in August 2025, Prime Minister Modi, he visited Japan for the 15th summit, and there was joint vision for the next decade that was adopted. On the basis of the 8 pillars, in October 2025, Sanae Takaichi, she became the Japanese first women Prime Minister, and she is an Abe protege. That is, she is staunch over the assertive China posture. And at the same time, in July 2026, we have seen the Japanese Prime Minister visiting India for the 16th summit that will take place. So this is the complete 75 years in glance that what has happened between India and Japan in the past, right from the peace treaty that was signed in 1952. Over here, when it comes to the international relation, you must see the ties between both the nations through various lenses. Like, for example, when it comes to the realism or neorealism, so both the states, they balance against the rising revisionist China in an anarchic system. So they share the threat perception, that is of Taiwan or East or the South China Sea, and even the Himalayas. And even this drives the balancing behavior without any kind of the formal alliance that is there between India and Japan. Then when it comes to liberalism, so there is the deep economic interdependence of both the nations. There is a CEPA, that is Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. There is also $68 billion investment pledge, and more than 1,500 of the firms of Japan, they are working in India right now. There's also dense institutional linkages where we have more than 70 dialogue mechanisms between both the countries, and that create the mutual stakes that make the conflict costly. Then we have the constructivism. There we have the shared democratic identity, the civilizational memory where we connect with the Buddhism, and also a jointly anchored idea or the authored idea about the Indo-Pacific itself. Then also this relates with the balance of power because Japan is a key US ally. Also, India is a non-aligned rising power, so they jointly hedge against the Chinese regional waste, alongside with the US and Australia, which are basically partner in the Quad. Then we have the strategic autonomy also, where India retains its freedom of action. That is, along with the Russian defense imports and even the oil purchases. So we have the ties which are deepened with the Japan and the Quad also. So therefore, India is balancing with its strategic autonomy. And then we have multi-alignment where India is simultaneously deepening ties with Japan, with Russia, with the Gulf countries, with Russia, with US, with France. And that is again very important when it comes to the international relation lens. Now, both the countries have their shared interest. And I will say that the partnership today, it is guided by the national interest of both the nations. When it comes to India, so India have the access to the Japanese capital, high technology transfer, and even the quality infrastructure financing as well. Also, there is a credible external balancer against Chinese assertiveness on the northern border and in the Indian Ocean as well when it comes to India, what it thinks of Japan. There's also legitimacy and support for its own permanent UNSC seat bid and the global power aspiration, along with the diversified defense technology sourcing beyond Russia and the West nations as well. Now, when it comes to the interest of Japan, so there is a large English-speaking, demographically young manufacturing and market alternative that India provides to it alongside with China, or this is the alternative to China, that is China Plus One initiative. Also, Japan gets a capable Indo-Pacific security partner to share the burden of deterring China without expanding Japan's own constitutional military role too fast. And there are diplomatic weight for its free and open Indian Ocean Indo-Pacific vision that requires buy-in from the South Asia's leading power, and also resilient de-risk supply chains for the semiconductors, batteries, and even the critical minerals that we are talking about in this age of the AI. All right, so over here you can see that Japan is actually financing, or it is giving the ODA, that is the the development assistance, and you can see it is about the Mumbai-Ahmedabad high-speed rail, where there is 85% of the ODA that had been funded. In the case of Delhi Metro as well, there is 70% ODA that this project was funded. For the Northeast Connectivity and Industrial Corridor, we have 65% of the ODA that had been funded by Japan. And then comes the smart grid infrastructure and green energy, or the green hydrogen, where we have 45% of the ODA funded by Japan. Now, this is also very important to note. Very important that Japan is the only foreign partner which is allowed to invest in the sensitive infrastructure project that is in India's northeast region, highlighting the strategic trust that we have with Japan. All right, now over here it is also very important that this is the 16th annual summit that we are talking about that is being held in the New Delhi. Now, there are also, when it comes to the this complete summit that is being organized, it comes amid the sharply worsened Japan and China ties after Takaichi had remarked over the Taiwan contingency triggering the Japanese self-defense action, where the Takaichi have said that ultimately, in the case of China, if it moves towards, the Taiwan, so the Japan have the right to self-defend itself. And that is again where the China have retaliated with the export curbs on Japanese seafood. And days just before the visit of Japanese Prime Minister, fresh export controls had been laid down on 40 of the Japanese entities, including the defense and the research bodies as well. Now, what are the certain expectations from this particular summit? Let's see. So there would be a joint statement that will be released for the 16th annual summit. There will be also, there may be a joint declaration on the economic security cooperation, a joint statement on the AI cooperation as well, and even the MOUs will be signed in the sectors of energy, resilience, pharmaceuticals, batteries, and even the critical minerals that are the expected outcomes of this summit. But at the same time, it is not that India and Japan do not have any challenges. So there are certain challenges as well. Like, for example, when it comes to the political challenges, so we have seen that there had been frequent prime minister turnover in the Japan. Now, this creates the episodic uncertainty in the top level continuity, even if the institution persists. Then there is the challenge in the economic scenario where there is the persistent trade imbalance. And there is the slow CEPA review process and the progress. India's non-tariff barriers are there on the agriculture and the textiles as well, which are a concern for Japan. Now, in the security scenario, Japan's Article 9 constitutional constraints are there, and that caps the depth of the defense alliances. Ultimately, we have seen that Takaichi have said that they will move towards the modernization of their armed forces. And ultimately, they will be moving ahead with the modernization. They will be moving ahead with the ties with the other countries as well, bypassing Article 9. So let's see how the ties in the defense segment also they works out between India and Japan. India is reluctant to enter the former blocs, and that limits the joint operational planning between both the nations. When it comes to the technological gaps, so there is the IP protection and data governance standards where both the nations they differ. There is also talent mobility visa regimes. They remain restrictive on the Japanese side. Also, when it comes to the regional perspective, you will see that there are divergent approach to the Russia and to the China engagement as well. Now, when it comes to Takaichi, so in her lead, the Japan is more confrontational after Takaichi. But India prefers that there should be a calibrative engagement, and that creates the occasional friction as well. In the global scenario, there is differing UNSC reform coalition tactics also between India and Japan, and there are different postures at the multilateral fora, whether it is G7, it is G20, or the Global South forums as well. And there are future risks where escalating Japanese or the China tension that could pressure India to take sides more explicitly than its strategic autonomy doctrine that it actually prefers. So these are the key challenges when it comes to both the nations, relationship. And I hope that this, gives you the complete idea that what are the past between, or what is the past between India and Japan, how the relationship they move through the period of timelines, and also what is the current scenario when it comes to the 16th annual summit between India and Japan, and what are the future outcomes and the challenges as well. And that is how you must prepare any of the international relation or the bilateral relationship between any of the country. So that would be all in this session. I hope that you have enjoyed the complete session. Do not forget to leave the like, even share this session with your friends, and also do comment in the comment section that if you have liked the session, and also do subscribe if you have not subscribed it yet. So that would be all. Thank you. Bye-bye. Take care and Jai Hind.